this is by Alessandro Moreschi, the last known castrati to have ever lived. Before the 1700s, essentially all Western music compositions were religious. This was a large market for the Catholic Church, as all choir boys were the product of the Vatican Catholic Church. In order to preserve and capitalize on these young men's voices, a common practice began to take place. They began castrating boys. With the peak of popularity around the 18th century, boys aged 7 to 9 were forcefully castrated, meaning their genitals were cut off. They were then known as castritis, or in English, castrados. Boys were drugged to the point of barely being conscious and then placed in a hot bath. Operations had an incredible mortality rate of about 80%. This was done in order to stop the maturing of their singing voices. These boys would grow to have the lungs of men while having the vocal range and voice of a prepubescent boy. Priests are said to have offered money to parents of talented children for the privilege of performing this horrific procedure. It is rumored that priests would go as far to tell parents that if any suspicion arose among family and/or friends, to tell them that the boy had been in an accident with a wild boar. The Sistine Chapel still continued to use castrati boys until 1903, the last of which being Alessandro Moreschi. It is by no means a secret in today's society that the Catholic Church has had a severe problem internally in terms of pedophilia. However, the widespread knowledge of this wasn't always the case. In fact, child abuse within the church really only came to light as recently as the 1980s. This is an astonishing fact considering that for decades, the church has covered up thousands of child abuse cases. In 2002, the Boston Globe would bring the problem to the forefront when they blew the lid on a horrendous child abuse case within the church. Among the worst are John Jogan, who molested up to 130 different boys, and Lawrence Murphy, who raped a staggering 200 disabled and deaf boys. Proof of the disgraceful view the church has on pedophilia lies among the punishment Lawrence Murphy received, which was none. That's right, not only was he not punished, he wasn't even fired. On top of that, when he passed away, he was buried with the full honors of a Holy Roman Catholic priest. These are just two of over 3,000 priests who have been accused around the world of child molestation in the last 50 years alone. A statement released by Pope Francis himself in 2014 revealed that pedophilia within the church is at about 2%. This is an incredible number, meaning that it is 1 in 50 priests. In other words, with the estimated 414,000 priests active globally, there are about 8,286 pedophile priests active right now, of which nearly half most likely reside within the United States. Most of these priests will never see punishment, as the covering up of these crimes internally has allowed for enough time for the statute of limitations to run out. In the 1930s, Francisco Franco successfully led a rebellion military to overthrow Spain's Democratic Republic. He would go on to rule Spain and establish a brutal dictatorship. He had in plan a mind to purify Spain. One way in which he believed to achieve this was to steal babies and prevent deemed undesirable parents from raising their newborns. As the Catholic Church ran most of the schools, hospitals, and orphanages at the time, Franco got in close ties with the church. Nuns working within hospitals ran by the church would take mothers' newborn babies out of the room for an examination, where they would then swap the child with an already dead baby kept on ice. They would then return with a dead baby and convince the mother that their child had passed away. These children were then taken and either placed in Catholic orphanages or sold in illegal profit-making adoptions, of which all profits went to the church. When Franco died in 1975, the church could have stopped these actions. However, they continued stealing babies until at least 1987. It is remarkable to think of the impact that this has had on thousands of people within Spain. These children ended up living completely different lives than they may have. 15% of all children adopted from 1960 to 1989 were stolen babies or sold into the child trafficking trade. This is Sister Abaya, who on March 27, 1992 went missing. Under a fridge was a single slipper that belonged to her, but aside from that, nothing else was found. It wasn't long before her body was found in a nearby well. Upon investigation, it was deemed that she had committed suicide, and the case was closed. 16 years later, in 2007, the case was reopened by the Central Bureau of Investigation. This came at the request of over 60 nuns working where Sister Abaya herself had worked. They believed suicide was not the cause of her death. 3 individuals, Father Pathuru Kayil, Father Thomas M. Couture, and Sister Sefi, were all interviewed under a narco-analysis, which is a serum test. With the serum at work, all 3 made a shocking confession. They revealed that they had murdered Sister Abaya in a joint effort. So what could possibly motivate not 1, but 3 members of the church to commit such a crime? Sister Abaya had walked in on all 3, naked. A panicked Sister Sefi then grabbed an axe, hitting Sister Abaya 3 times over the head, killing her. All 3 then proceeded in throwing her body down a well, the well in which she had been found. Investigators working the case have claimed that there are invisible hands manipulating the case behind the scenes. It starts with the initial evidence found at the crime scene. For some odd reason, all the evidence, including Sister Abaya's personal diary, her veil, the slipper, and other key evidence has went missing. Multiple investigators working the case have mysteriously resigned from their positions. Some have had their careers ruined and others have even committed suicide. There is a strong belief that there is pressure from the Catholic Church, who is manipulating this case with their vast resources and money. As a result, all 3 suspects have yet to be charged, as a trial hasn't been able to take place due to the evidence disappearing. The church has always had a strong stance on sexuality and sex outside of marriage. Therefore, it comes as no surprise that there's a dark history involving the treatment of women. Beginning in the 18th century and taking place mainly in Ireland, the church imprisoned many women involved in prostitution, even if only suspect, and those deemed as promiscuous. They were placed in asylums to get treatment for their sins. As proof of the vast power the church holds over many, a large magnitude of these women were placed in these asylums by their own families. Inside the asylums, the women were forced into intense labor for 7 days a week. Their work gained a hefty profit for the church, as the laundries were run for profit. Around 30,000 women were sent to these asylums, where they were often sexually abused, beat, and had horrific living conditions. Running from the 18th to the 20th century, this history of the church was incredibly only revealed in 1993, when over 150 bodies were found buried in a mass grave in Ireland. The church had buried these women secretly, without notifying families or authorities, as none had death certificates. Unsurprisingly, the Catholic Church has once again not apologized.